Very funny. Good evening. I call to order the September 27th, 2023 City of Calabasas Special Council meeting. Tonight, I'm joined by Mayor Pro Tem Weintraub, Council members Albrecht, Bezagian, and Kraut, as well as our city manager, city attorney, city clerk, and staff. If you'd like to provide public comment and are in person, please complete a speaker card and give it to our city clerk. They're in the back of the room. If you're joining us via Zoom, please press raise hand or *9 if you're joining via phone and *6 to unmute yourself when the item you'd like to comment on is presented. For items not on the agenda, please wait for my announcement for oral communication and public comment. When you're called to speak, please state your name and the city you live in. You'll be allowed up to 3 minutes to address the city council regarding any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Tonight, we are thrilled to have the Pledge of Allegiance be led by Girl Scout Troop 3256.
May I please have your attention for our flag ceremony? Please stand for the presentation of our colors. Color guard attention. Color guard advance. Color guard halt. Color guard present the colors. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join us in singing You're a Grand Old Flag. You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave.
You're the
Emblem of the land of the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue, and is ever a boast or a brag. And should all acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the grand old flag. Yes, sir. Color guard, post the colors. Color guard, salute the colors. Color guard, dismiss.
Thank you very much for a tremendous way to start our meeting, Troop 3256 and family members. May I have a motion now to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second, been moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Thank you. Very first item we have is actually a presentation pertaining to earthquake insurance coverage. And we have our CFO, Ron Allers, who will introduce the item, and presenters who are joining us via Zoom. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Shapiro and City Council. During this last year's budget discussions, Council had questions and comments relating to earthquake insurance. The city has not historically purchased earthquake insurance. We would do so through the joint powers agreement that we have with the California Joint Powers Insurance Authority, which the city has been a member of for many decades. Tonight, you have a couple extra attachments in the report. The first attachment is a presentation, which I will turn it over in a minute to Alliance Services and Mr. Robert Lowe. The second attachment is a list of cities that are a part of CJPIA and their purchase of earthquake insurance. So you can see how many other cities participate in this specific program. And then the last attachment is a listing of the various properties that the city owns and the cost for the earthquake insurance on each one of those properties. In total, if the city purchase earthquake insurance for all of our properties, the annual cost would be $350,000. And the list you see there has it broken out by all the different buildings and structures that we have. With that, Mari, if we could bring in Mr. Robert Lowe from Alliance Services so he could give the presentation. And Miss Tony Consolo is also with us tonight. She is our contact at CJPIA. I will go ahead and run the presentation here from the laptop here. And Mr. Lowe, we can leave it off to you to present.
Thank you so much, Ron, and good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to present to all of you. As Ron mentioned, my name is Robert Lowe. I am, and that really is my true birth name. I am a senior vice president with Alliance Insurance Services Public Entity Division. Just to give you guys a quick little bit of insight, and Ron, if we can go to the next slide. Alliance Insurance Services is the property broker for the California Joint Powers Insurance Authority, which is about 103 cities, of which the city of Calabasas is a member of. Just to give you a little bit of insight into Alliance. You know, stats are great and they look good, but I think ultimately the most important aspect is that we currently work with and represent about 90% of all public entities in the state of California. Through one form or another, we're either property brokers, liability brokers, or we do all of the lines of coverages for most municipalities in the state. Next slide, please. Ron had asked me to come in and provide you guys a quick oversight of some potential strategies on how to look at earthquake coverage and potentially purchase earthquake coverage. So I know you guys have a packed agenda, so I will try to be as brief and
Robert, excuse me. This is Mayor Shapiro. Excuse me for interrupting. If possible, could you move the mic closer on your mouth? We're losing some of your important content. Appreciate it.
No problem. Is that better?
Better.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I will discuss how the earthquake coverage works, why it could be a mistake to rely on FEMA, because a lot of municipalities view FEMA as the backstop and the end all be all for their potential earthquake purchase or lack of purchase. I'm going to talk about some strategies for purchasing the coverage, and then I'm going to touch base on the difference between what is traditionally a difference in conditions policy, which is how earthquake is typically purchased by municipalities, and parametric coverage, which is a insurance-linked security type of coverage. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Earthquake insurance is traditionally what's known as a CAT policy. CAT, C-A-T, stands for catastrophic, and it is a property-specific type of coverage. In this particular case, earthquake, flood, earth movement, land movement, things of that nature are what are typically considered as CAT coverage. Earth movement is a natural disaster. Now, an earthquake policy generally covers the damage to a building, and depending on the policy, the lost income and or revenue that particular building or location may generate. Earthquake coverage is relatively straightforward. A shake and or event occurs. Claim is filed, reported to the carrier. Carrier pays for the claim, but there is a deductible, and the deductible is typically done on a percentage and or minimum basis. Industry standard is a 5% deductible per location, or historically it's about $100,000 per location. Now, where this is interesting is because most municipalities and cities purchase earthquake because, as part of a CIP plan, municipalities will use certain locations and buildings as collateral for their bond requirements or to get the funding for other locations. And part of those requirements typically ask that not only the municipality purchase the coverage for property, but also cover it from an earthquake percentage. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Historically, most municipalities rely on FEMA. There has been a bit of a mentality that if an earthquake happens, FEMA will reimburse us. Now, while that is very true, the reality is that there are certain locations to a city that are absolutely critical to city infrastructure and operations, i.e., your police department, your fire department, your civic center / city hall. Dealing with FEMA, hopefully none of you ever have needed to. However, of every wildfire that has occurred in the state of California since 2017, in one form or another, they have been my client. I can tell you from experience that dealing with FEMA is a very arduous process. It's a lot of paperwork, and they typically require that you file a claim with your insurance carrier, receive a declination, and then they start figuring out what they are going to pay out. Purchasing coverage on key locations would be beneficial to the city from a perspective that it is an immediate influx of cash, not only to continue operations, but frankly, to begin the rebuild process while you are dealing with FEMA and trying to get reimbursement for the larger purchases or the larger reimbursement from FEMA. From a strategy perspective, you can purchase a small limit for an immediate cash influx while dealing with FEMA. There are other aspects as well of purchasing a high deductible limit. Larger cities have a tendency of doing this where they will purchase a significantly high deductible and to ensure that FEMA will pay the deductible and then the insurance kicks in afterwards. If we can move to the next slide, please, Ron. So from a purchasing perspective, as Ron mentioned at the beginning, and as Tony will probably go over, there has been a proposition put forth to the city for purchasing coverage across every single location that you guys own. Now, that may just not be economically feasible, or there may be locations that are not that critical to city infrastructure. What many of my clients have a tendency of doing is that they will purchase coverage on the key locations that are critical to the city. They will focus on potentially purchasing a high deductible. In dealing with FEMA, FEMA is happy typically. It's a model that has not been put to the test very often, but typically they are happy to pay reimburse a municipality or an organization for their high deductible as long as there is insurance above that deductible. So that's a second strategy. Or there is what's known as an insurance-linked security policy, which is known in the market as parametric coverage. If we can go to the next slide. Parametric coverage is an interesting newer kind of coverage that is available to municipalities. So what parametric is your traditional difference in condition / earthquake coverage is an event occurs, the building suffers damage, a claim is submitted, the carrier pays minus the deductible. Now, what parametric is a lot of different ways to dice up the coverage, but at its most basic level, parametric coverage is based off of ground shake intensity and how hard the ground shakes around, or where the epicenter was and where your locations are based on pins and geocoding, and how hard the ground shake intensity was near or at those specific locations. There are multiple triggers. There is no deductible, and as long as the ground shake triggers a certain amount of ground speed, the insurance coverage will pay out Now, I believe that the goal, and I'll hand it off to Tony and Ron in just a second, but I believe that the goal tonight is informational to begin with, but also to be able to allow Ron an opportunity to explore the potential different options that may be available for the city. If we can go to the next slide, please. With that being said, I think that concludes my portion or my informational piece of the earthquake coverage, but I am happy to take any questions.
You have anything to add, or does I see Ms. Consolo on the?
I think at this point, Mayor, we're happy to answer any questions that any of the council may have regarding earthquake coverage. Just a reminder, the city does not currently purchase earthquake insurance.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for that report. Let me turn to council questions and comments. Start with Councilmember Bazagian.
Yes, when I was reviewing the report or the report in the slideshow regarding the recommendation that you go for a high deductible, the question I had was, is that case specific to Calabasas City, or is that just general advice you give to everybody?
Great question. That is advice that I give to a lot of my clients when they are exploring the purchase of earthquake coverage, knowing that it can be expensive on a primary basis. So it is advice and a recommendation in terms of being able to control the cost, but also be able to tap into FEMA funds if necessary, while also protecting the city's assets.
But is that only for large scale operations, like you said, multi-location, or like is that what you tell businesses maybe with one location or individual homeowners, that same advice?
No, you hit it right on the head. It is for large scale kind of operation.
And we fall in that category.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Weintraub.
Thank you for the presentation. Two questions. On the member roster, do most of those cities have the high deductible option? And then my follow-up question is, do most cities insure all of their buildings, or do they pick and choose?
Fantastic questions. Thank you for that. So I work with about 43 Southern California cities, not including California Joint Powers Insurance Authority cities. I would probably say that 30% of the cities that I work with purchase the high deductible. It is a bit of a newer concept. Additionally, I can frankly say that about 60% of all of the cities that I work with across California purchase some sort of earthquake coverage. They do not all purchase coverage for every single one of their buildings, because every city's budget and risk appetite differs a little bit. But I think that the important piece of the message tonight is there's 100 different ways we can dice it up for you guys. It really comes down to what works best and what is most customized for your specific city. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of approach.
I'm sorry, my last question, and maybe it's for Ron, I'm not sure, but who provided the valuation for our city facilities, our complex?
That was a company that, well, one, the original value stems from when we constructed the buildings. So, for example, the 3 buildings that were here on the Civic Center campus. But CJPIA hired a property firm, and they went and inspected all of our buildings 3.5 years ago, I think, and it did a whole report to CJPIA on the status of our buildings, and then the values are also determined that way.
So these numbers are about 3 years old?
That's one way to look at it. It's one way to look at it. And I know that they do increase them over time as well. And we're actually going to be embarking on another study, I think in a couple months, right, Tony?
Okay, but
Yes.
looking at this, like the valuations are pretty accurate.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Kraft. Thank you as well for that presentation. Appreciate your time on this. In looking at the list of your cities, member cities here and their coverage, a couple of questions come to mind. You mentioned about 150 cities in the group. Is that right? And there's about 50 on this list? But
I believe that there are 103 cities in California Joint Powers Insurance Authority. I'll look to Tony for that one, which is one joint powers authority specifically, but across California, there's multiple JPAs.
okay, but in this group, we'd say that then there is half, let's say, participating. About that, okay. And I also see on the list it says earthquake and flood coverage. Do each city have both, or is this the list of some cities have flood coverage, some cities have earthquake?
So I will look at Tony to add anything that I may miss. Without getting too technical, because I don't want to lose any of you. CJPIA has what's known as a memorandum of coverage, very similar to what you guys have as a memorandum of understanding with other cities and other organizations. They kind of set the terms. There is a certain percentage of the members that purchase their own standalone coverage that comes along with flood coverage. And those members that do not purchase earthquake or flood get an automatic sublimit for flood, which is significantly lower than purchasing the higher limit. Tony, did I miss anything on that?
Yeah, I think you covered that very well.
All right, thank you. And then you had mentioned that some organizations or cities might need coverage because a bond measure on a particular building required them to have that. Any idea on this list how many are just there for their bond coverage, or how many have, larger coverage for their city buildings?
So on the specific list that you are looking at, no. However, in terms of, I personally work with about 150 cities within the state of California. In one form or another, at least 70% of them do have bond requirements that requires them to purchase in some form or another some type of earthquake and catastrophic insurance coverage.
Okay. The last couple of questions are regarding this attachment number 3, the estimate, if you will. I want to follow up with Councilman or Mayor Pro Tem Weintraub's question, which is the values that we have there. Are these replacement values?
Yes. So those are 100% replacement cost values. It was done by a fully independent third-party appraisal company about 3.5 years ago, and what CJPIA did, and the reason why I know this is because Alliant, as the broker, was incredibly involved in it. What CJPIA did was, historically, they had never done appraisals for any of their members. So we did it for every single member across the board by this third party. Since that was done and implemented, there are certain Marshall and Swift trends that get applied year over year, which over the last 2 years have been applied. And so we are about to kick off the new round of appraisals for every single CJPIA member. So it is full replacement cost. Since the appraisal was done, we have trended based on the Marshall and Swift numbers, and we are about to get the most updated version in the next 6 months.
Okay, great. And then the last question would be this. We have an estimated contribution in the lower right-hand corner of $350,000. That would be an annual policy. Could you tell me if that would be a parametric or a traditional coverage? And is that with a high or a low deductible? And what is the high or low deductible?
That's a great question. And I'll let Tony jump in if I miss anything. However, that is for every single building and or piece of property the city of Calabasas owns. Again, you don't have to insure every single one, but that particular estimate is an annual cost for every location that the city owns. It is based off of a 5% per building deductible, which is considered a pretty low type of deductible. What we have seen, and there is a neighbor way to the south of you that may have a tenant within the city that has these great little rabbit or mouse ears that actually places a $25 million deductible and purchases a $50 million limit above that, right? So again, high deductible, we can dice it up in whichever direction it is that the city desires. It could be a 10%, it could be 2 million, it could be 5 million, it could be significantly higher than that. Really, the important piece to keep in mind with that is to create a deductible that's high enough for FEMA to come in, not try to dice things up and, for lack of a better term, nickel and dime things, and just pays the deductible and then insurance kicks in above that.
Okay. And again, the reason I'm asking is if we decide to go with a higher or lower deductible, I'm trying to figure out if that number is going up or going down. It sounds like it's a low deductible, and if we want to go with a high deductible, that number will come down.
That is correct.
And lastly, is that traditional or parametric insurance?
That is traditional insurance.
Okay. That's all I had. Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Albrecht.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for your presentation and answering the questions, some of which have been answered already for me. I was very happy to learn about this approach. It's used in residential sometimes, but on a commercial basis, on a large scale, it's a little bit different. And what I know about insurance, it's generally customized. It's not a cookie cutter where you've got one policy for all. And particularly when I look at the variety of cities, which I looked at, and particularly there were some of them which were in earthquake prone areas, Big Bear, Mammoth Lakes, for example, and then versus someone like ourselves or Westlake Village. I think it's probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, some cities don't have a lot of facilities. Maybe they have a half a dozen. I haven't counted all of our facilities, but I think it's up to us maybe to take an accounting of our facilities, which one we value the most and which ones we want to protect, and kind of base a policy, get a premium quote on a variety of different levels and see what we want. That, I guess, would be up to our city manager to make some of those decisions. It's an interesting way to go. And I just think the idea of coordinating the deductible with FEMA is really terrific. There's going to be a delay in receiving funds back from FEMA. I'm not sure what that is. I know during the '94 earthquake, people complained it was quite extensive. In your experience, how long might that be?
That I think is the $1 million question.
Yes, I mean, 2 years.
Well, it could be a lot longer. Candidly speaking, I have a client that literally got their last FEMA payment for the Northridge earthquake 8 years ago, 2012. So it could really stretch, right? I think the interesting aspect, and one of the most important pieces that I think that you guys could all kind of consider as well, is if an event were to happen tomorrow, and knock on wood, it doesn't, right? But if an event were to happen tomorrow and FEMA, first question is, did you purchase earthquake coverage? When the answer is no, they will pay for it. But the FEMA requirement moving forward is, if we paid you out on something, the anticipation is that you will purchase insurance on that piece of property moving forward. And we have the right to audit at any point in the future. Now, any point in the future, as we all know, could mean 2 years, it could mean 10 years, or it could mean 20 years. So that puts municipalities with a lot of assets in a weird and tough position, where it's always better to have some sort of coverage in place rather than have none. Because the simple version and the simple answer to your specific question is it could take anywhere from 1.5 years to potentially 10 years for them to close it out and pay out.
Thank you for that. One more question. You mentioned, well, you didn't mention it, but I know the word replacement value is always a big word in these type of contracts. What type of replacement would we be, could we opt for? Because let's assume this building we're in right now is partially in need of repair, and other buildings are not necessarily completely destroyed. Can we apply the replacement by a dollar value, or does it have to be by a building completion?
So what replacement cost means is the cost to replace with like, kind, and quality, right? So historically, what that means is the building that you're in, we could call it a $10 million building if something were to happen to it. Again, hopefully not, but if something were to happen to it, and it's $11 or $12 million to repair it, you get the full cost to repair it, right? That's what in and of itself replacement cost valuation means. And typically what insurance policies will have is what's known as a clause that as long as you are reporting it within X amount of the value, have that be 80% or 90%, we will give you the full replacement cost up to 140% of the actual valuation.
Gotcha.
Now there are agreed valued types of policies which we wouldn't recommend, right? And that's meaning, you know, I am declaring this building to be worth $10 million. If something happens to this building, I expect $10 million. It might be a $12.5 million building, but because it was an agreed value, you're only going to get the 10. So from our perspective, from the JPIA's perspective, replacement cost is always the direction we want to go because it provides you specific protections. Now, I'll also add any policy that's typically placed, whether it's property, earthquake, flood, it's placed on what's known as a blanket type of limit. So it's the total insurable value of all of the assets that are being reported as a total limit. So that means that if building A suffers 5% damage, but building B suffers 80% damage, your total limit can be applied to any building as needed. It doesn't necessarily hold you to the value that was reported on that building.
Thank you. That's where I was going on it. So we can use it as we need it.
Correct.
And is it necessary to insure all the buildings? Is that
not at all? Well, if you want to recover and be made whole on a building, you do have to report that building. But again, as I mentioned earlier, that doesn't necessarily mean that there may be some buildings, or there could be a building in the middle of a park that really is a shed that, you know, it's not worth that much, and you may not worry about replacing it in an event. So again, a lot of different ways to pick and choose what locations we would like to cover.
Thank you. Thank you for answering the question so thoroughly.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for the report and a lot of great questions. Ron, you had something?
Yeah, Councilmember Albright asked the question on how long FEMA takes. I was at the city of Glendale in '94 when the earthquake hit. We were trying to close out the earthquake in 2005 with FEMA. Glendale had a number of properties that were damaged in that earthquake, so it was not simple, but we were still, if you will, waiting for a couple $1 million left to come in back in 2005. So 11 years later on that. So FEMA is not quick by any stretch of the imagination. And depending on how big the earthquake is and what damage it caused to government as well as to private businesses, it can take years just because of the paperwork intensity of FEMA.
That question was really guiding me because we're going to have to pony up until it happens, until we get our reimbursement on it. So I've got to be prepared for that. So we have to take really all of this into account.
And I'll mention that, a lot of times FEMA keeps asking for paperwork to be resubmitted, and they want more data, and the cities contribute the more data, and then it still gets strung out for long periods of time.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. Let me go ahead. I think these will be mostly for you, Robert. And I appreciate the report and great questions already asked by my colleagues. Looking at the FEMA, just for clarification, because I was having a little trouble with the microphone at first. As far as FEMA's determination of what would be a payable event, or rather not an event, payable property or payable insured property in our city, even if it was insured, is, if I heard you correctly, things in the city such as the Civic Center, City Hall, Library would be up at the high end of that list, whereas something like the Tennis and Swim Center, which is a more of an entity which possibly raises funds or is not just a nonprofit or civic center, maybe down towards the bottom. I want to make sure I understood that correctly as far as FEMA goes in evaluation.
No. So as far as FEMA is concerned, a municipality will provide FEMA the entire extent of their damage, right? Now, the tennis center may be significantly worth more to the city than maybe a neighboring city, right? Because there's a lot of events that are hosted at that tennis center. It may be a revenue generating location. Everybody's risk appetite as an individual entity is very different. So as far as FEMA is concerned, when a big natural type of event happens and FEMA funds are available, they would anticipate the city to submit everything that the city wants to be reimbursed for.
Okay, so there is no difference in the properties in our city.
Correct.
I'm looking at our city manager if he has a comment he'd like to make. Okay. And then just clarifying, you already discussed it. FEMA would eventually, hopefully, reimburse the deductible on valued properties in the city that we had insured. Okay. And
that is correct.
Thank you. Can you give an estimate what you're talking about with high deductible? Because you brought the estimate of 300,000, I believe, was based upon 300,000 plus 5%. You indicated what would high deductible be? 10, 15%, 20%?
Well, I mean, frankly, that depends. So let's just rounding a number. We're at 300,000 and change for 5% deductible. If we were to remove, because it's not necessarily based on the number of locations, but the total value and the total number that's being insured, right? So if we were to move the deductible up to say a 20% deductible, the cost would probably drop about 10 to 15%. If we were to remove half of the locations, depending on the total insurable value, if it's half of the total insurable value, we can anticipate the cost on an annual basis to go down by half, right? I think from a cost perspective, the main piece that I want to make sure that anybody walks away from tonight is it's not so much what the annual cost is for all of the locations that you guys have. I would suggest and recommend that the focus be what is the cost for the locations that are most critical to the city and the city's operations. And as I mentioned before, it could be your fire departments or your fire stations, your police departments, your civic center and the tennis center, right? So those four in and of themselves could make up 70% of your total values, or they could make up half of your total values.
Okay, thanks very much. Last question, just for clarification. You brought up replacement costs, talked about it quite a bit. Does that also include, I assume within 140%, it would, potentially the increased costs for materials and increased labor costs that go up each year, whether it's residential or commercial, or in this case, city buildings?
I genuinely appreciate that question. My answer is absolutely. I could not imagine convincing someone to purchase an earthquake policy without it including the increased cost of construction, because as we know, cost of materials, shipping them here, cost of labor changes quite drastically multiple times throughout a year. So simple answer to the question is yes.
Thank you. And last one for me is referring to the parametric coverage discussed. Your trigger number, if I read it right and heard you right, was about 6.5 on the earthquake, on the Richter scale, or the for an earthquake. And then the question I had, you talked about it related to a location requirement for it being applicable coverage. What is that? If you can estimate or give us an idea, what is that location requirement?
Well, so that is the
epicenter.
That is the beauty about the parametric coverage, is you guys get to choose what your stake intensity is. I use 6.5 as just a simple example because that tends to be California native here. That tends to be the number that we always focus on, right? But again, from a risk appetite perspective, maybe what you want to insure against is the 7.2s or the 8.5s. From a ground shake intensity, so we can get really big limits for a relatively low cost based off of what shake intensity we pick. The beautiful thing about the shake intensity aspect is it's not based on a Richter scale. It is really based on what the USGS establishes as the speed and force of the ground shake intensity. So it doesn't necessarily limit you to a particular area of where the epicenter is. Where it triggers is how hard and fast was the ground shaking at your specific location. So you could be 10 miles from an epicenter, or you could be 100 miles from an epicenter. If the shake intensity was strong enough at your specific location to trigger what that minimum or maximum, potentially, hopefully not, but whatever, to trigger whatever that ground shake intensity range was on your policy, it immediately kicks coverage in.
Got it. And does duration of the shaking and also factor in, or is that not a factor?
Nope, it's purely based on the speed of which the ground moves under your specific location.
Very good. Thank you. I sounds like we need a little more detail of just my comments for the different options we have as a city council, if we want to consider this, looking at what each individual building might be and what the different options would be. But I'll look to council, see if there are any more comments or questions. And then look to Madam Clerk. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on this matter?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Is there further direction to be given to staff on this by council?
When would it be appropriate to ask for this to come back in more detail?
I guess if that's a question for me, I can work with Ron and Tony on securing actual formal terms, multiple options for it to be presented to council. I think I would look at Ron to see how quick he would like to get this forward.
So we can definitely come back to council, although we're entering the holiday period, probably by January for sure, but we can try and see about hitting one of the November meetings. Although it would just depend on how fast Tony and Robert could do the options. Is council looking at all the options on the table? Would you like to see 4 options, 6 options, the parabolic? I know it's parametric, and so forth, or is there direction that you would like to stick with traditional insurance, versus the new parametric.
I think I want to hear from council. I only heard at least my comment and possibly Mayor Pro Tem Weintraub. So I want to make sure that council direction is to proceed in that manner before we go forward. So I'll
And if I could jump in, briefly, Mr. Mayor, noting this is just a presentation item, we would need just generic direction to go forward as opposed to specific selecting among the options at this stage. That'd have to come back.
Understood. But I've only heard two comments.
Correct. So yeah, we
would like to hear from my colleagues as to if they want this to come back and want further information on this item. Yes, Councilmember Albrecht.
I'd like to work on this as soon as possible. It's a burning problem, and it's hanging over our head. And the sooner we have an evaluation on multiple options, the better off we'll be, so we can determine what the high and low is. So I think I don't know about the paramedic or I'm not saying it right, but you know, with our area, whether that applies, but one look at a policy or premium cost for that based on our history, and certainly the highest deductible and then a middle ground. We need to get our feet wet as soon as possible on this.
Councilmember Kraut.
Yeah, I think philosophically, we need to decide as a council if we're looking for catastrophic coverage, just that, or if we're looking for, you know, some coverage in the event that a minor earthquake damages some of our buildings somewhat. If we're looking for the latter, then we definitely want to stick with traditional insurance. Just crunching numbers here. If we just did the Civic Center and the library, that's 2/3 of the cost right there. And when we take 2/3 of the property value, then we get 2/3 of the annual fee. So we're looking at a minimum of $250,000. And even if we went to a 20% deductible, we'd still be $200,000 for coverage here. So if that's in our appetite, then I say, let's move forward. I know that's a big budget line item that we don't have right now.
Matt,
Okay,
do you just want?
Yeah, so the council can't just make a purchase tonight. That wouldn't be what we could do. So the direction to go forward for further analysis, and
Councilmember Pizzacchi.
if that's the desire.
I just want to make sure we're all.
As indicated before we brought this here last hearing, yeah, I'm all in favor of this.
Okay, I am in favor of having it move forward and come back to us with options, all options. I'm not limiting at all what my thoughts would be. I'd like to see all the options, whether it's partial, city properties, all types of financial options, which our experts will provide us. Anything else? Okay. Yes, Councilmember Robert.
You know, we're talking about the different properties, and yes, the library and civic center is so valuable. But some of the properties that would be up to staff, city manager and staff to determine which ones they can live without. We try to keep the premium down to a low roar if we can, as best as we can. So I don't think we have to overinsure. We'll leave that to your judgment, and can't wait to see something come back so we can kick it around.
And that'll be part of the option set staff will bring back. I think we have a direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your reports. Thank you for being there, and thank you to our CFO as well. All right. We'll now move to council announcements. Mayor Pro Tem Weintraub.
Thank you. 2 announcements. The annual community fire briefing that was rescheduled will be taking place on October 2nd at 6 p.m. on Zoom, and the link is on our city website. And my second announcement is Walk to School Day is taking place on October 4th. So just drive a little slower around the schools. Hopefully you'll see lots of people walking. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albrecht.
Thank you. We have our annual food clinic coming up at Founders. That'll be next Saturday, and I signed up with my wife. This will be probably our 7th year in a row, I think. So the shots aren't so bad. It's very convenient. The sign up is on the city website. There's as of last night, there were plenty of spots available. So please take advantage of it. The staff there is fantastic. The The council is going to be partaking in the Hidden Hills Fiesta and Parade, which is this Saturday. That'll be my first parade, so I'm excited about doing that. But let's also want to contribute to a good neighbor policy with our sister city. And I think lastly, I had the good fortune 2 weeks ago to take a state water project inspection trip. It was offered to me through Las Virgenes Unified Las Virgenes Municipal Water District and Metropolitan Water District over a weekend, and it was I was a little reluctant to go at first, but when I got there, it was really amazing. I wish I had time to tell everybody what it was all about. We went from Lake Oroville through the Delta. We flew up and then we took a tour bus on the way all the way down through to Lake Castaic. It was just amazing. And they're in a world of hurt up there in the Delta because what affects them affects us. Southern California uses 2/3 of the water. We're 2/3 of the population in the state. They're only a third, but we all drink out of Mount Shasta. So it was exciting and look forward to seeing if some of the decisions we make here are the results of some of the things that I've seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bazagian.
Yes, I have two announcements. One is a happy one and one is not so happy. Sunday, October 1st, will mark the 20-year anniversary, believe it or not, of the formal announcement that the state would be acquiring Amundsen Ranch. And for those of you who remember that battle that started in 1992, shortly after the city incorporated, it lasted all the way until 2003 when the state bought the property for $150 million. So on October 1st, the governor came down by helicopter, landed on Amundsen Ranch. And for those of us who were there, it was a very exciting day to see the state purchase a property and avoid having a city that was about half the size of Calabasas built right on our northern border with the only ways out, Victory Boulevard and Las Virgenes Road. It would have completely transformed the city's ambiance forever. Okay, so that was my happy announcement. The not so happy announcement, if the council will indulge me, is not necessarily related to local government, but I'm going to make it anyways. Don't often talk about this subject. You know, starting in the 19th century, there were a series of incidents in the Ottoman Turkish Empire that involved ethnic cleansing of racial and religious minorities, which included everything from Armenians to Assyrians, Greeks, Jews, anybody there who wasn't Turkish. And my family left right in at that time period mostly. And you know, after every one of these incidents, again, the main Armenian genocide that occurred from 1915 to 1923, during the time it happened, nothing really was done. And afterwards, everybody said, well, you know, this was a horrible thing. We'll never allow it to happen again. The world will be conscious of this. And as we know, after 1923, we had many horrible, horrible incidents all around the world of ethnic cleansing, whether it was the Jewish Holocaust or other things, and too numerous to mention here. Again, the same pattern happened where these incidents would happen, and at the time, nobody would say anything. And afterwards, everyone would say how sorry they were and that it wouldn't happen again. So it's with great sadness that I read that there's a present ethnic cleansing going on in Armenia, and specifically in the Republic of Artsakh, an independent province. And you're seeing the same thing. Thousands of people killed, tens of thousands fleeing on foot, running wherever they can. Explosives, just all types of blockades and starvation. And right now, unfortunately, no one's doing anything. This is not a matter for our city council, but I'm up here and I'm going to talk about it because unfortunately, very few people are. And it deeply saddens me. I'm sure that after all of this is done and the ethnic cleansing is done, and an area that has been lived by these people for thousands and thousands of years before the recorded history will now be cleansed of any kind of presence of Armenians, which is very unfortunate on a personal and a political level. Even if it's not something you have a personal stake in, understand that by letting it happen and not saying anything, you are only One is only allowing it to happen in the future to other people. So thank you for indulging me. I'm not expecting the council to do anything, but I did want to say that as long as I'm up here. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, and they are really well said and well received, and sad to hear and sad to know. We all read about things or hear about things, but there is again, as you said, we do need to speak out. Any atrocities anywhere, as far as I'm concerned. So thank you. Councilmember Crowe.
Thank you. We have a few more things coming up. There's a lot of things coming up this week, so it's going to be a exciting time here in Calabasas. First of all, a scam alert presentation is being done here in Calabasas by the office of Assemblywoman Jackie Irwin. It's going to be October 5th at 10 a.m. You can find details for it on our website. In addition, there is a Foundation for Las Virgenes Schools inviting you to their first annual Texas Hold'em Poker Tournament, October 6th at 6:30 p.m. at Topanga Social. You can get more information about that at www.thefoundationlvs.org.
Thank you very much. And I have a couple announcements that were made first. Tonight was the beginning of the 10th annual Calabasas Film Festival. And the film festival runs from tonight all the way to Sunday, which ends with the Student Film Festival. Take a look online at our city site, website, or calabasasfilmfestival.com to go to the events, parties, and movies. Also coming up, we have, I want to make sure things weren't covered. October 2nd, next Monday, 1:30 p.m. We have a ribbon cutting for the Green Street groundbreaking ceremony, the northern edge of Las Virgenes. And it'll be a long project, a 2-year project, I believe. And it will help environmentally and beautify and make safe and increase parking for that area. So it's really going to be a great project. Come out if you wish. And then we have October 8th, at 2 to 4 p.m., our celebration of our Calabasas Library, 25th anniversary of our library in Calabasas will take place. Please come out. It's for the entire city from 2 to 4 to join in. And now I'd like to also read something. Tonight begins, well, actually September 15th began Hispanic Heritage Month, which is celebrated September 15th to October 15th. During this month, we honor the diverse history of generations of Latinos whose aspirations and achievements have shaped the soul of our nation. American could be defined in one word: possibilities. The Hispanic community has always embodied that ideal. It lives in the dreams of those who have only just arrived here and in the legacy of families who have been here for centuries. Latinos have helped chart America's course since our start as doctors and engineers, artists and entrepreneurs, and leaders in science, business, labor, government, and military, and across grassroots movements. Their faith and drive has pushed our country to grow, prosper, and pursue its highest ideals. During National Hispanic Heritage Month, we salute the vital contributions of all public servants, including members of our own staff here tonight and watching, I'm sure, on CTV or on Zoom, and of the more than 62 million Latinos who help make our nation stronger every day. Latino history is a story of hard work, family, faith, pride, and possibility, and it is proof that there is nothing we cannot do when we do it together. During National Hispanic Heritage Month, we salute Hispanic heritage and recognize the impact Hispanic people have had and continue to have on our nation. Thank you. We will now move to oral communication and public comment, and we have one card only. If you want to speak, please fill out a card. We have Mark Levinson. Welcome.
Thank you. Mark Levinson. I live in Los Angeles. I'm the immediate past chair of the Chamber of Commerce. We have a couple of things coming up. The main one, obviously, in October, which is, believe it or not, next week. is the Pumpkin Fest, which is in collaboration with the city. This year, the chamber's in charge of the beer garden and the Business Expo. We're looking forward to that. We've been working very hard on it, and we have a lot of volunteers. And anyone that wishes to volunteer, please give us a call. We just had a ribbon cutting, or one coming up, for Crumbles Cookies, and I understand it was attended by the mayor, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you very much. I understand it's a new business in the Commons, and it was reported to me that the food was delicious. The cookies were great. And then in October the 19th, we have a lunch coming up at Cambria, sponsored by the Getzels, hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, group with Compass, and they are also becoming far more active in the chamber. We are pleased to report also that we have chamber is growing enough, we're strong enough. We have hired a part-time person to assist in the office as well. So we are in very good financial, not very good, solid financial state going forward, that we're able to hire another person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other cards. Madam Clerk, is there anyone, members of the public wishing to speak on any item not on the agenda?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to consent items. We have consent items 1 through 5. Do any of my colleagues wish to pull any consent items?
5, please.
Okay. Item 5, any others? Okay, why don't we go ahead on item 5?
Yes, as I stated during the initial discussion of bringing dispensaries here, I'm opposed to that and I would never vote for it. So I would never vote to authorize acceptance of a grant for something that I would not vote for in the underlying issue. Furthermore, this should not be on consent. This bothers me that it's on consent in the same way that the original staff report that brought up the issue, I felt was not objective. Putting this on consent is also not a good idea, not when we know that there is opposition to this. I would ask courtesy at least of not doing that, or though if you're going to do it, I'm going to take it off every time. So yeah, either way, it's going to come off. I think it's a big mistake for us to go down this path. Furthermore, in the text of the report, it states that the state, no one's going to pressure us to bring in dispensaries once we accept the grant. I don't believe that. I think the state will, and I think that we're, as a smaller city, susceptible to that. And so for those reasons, I'm not going to vote for this.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Weintraub.
And I just want to clarify that my vote on this is only vote for a citywide survey. So not for a cannabis program, but that we're able to do a survey to survey the community on this issue, but we're not approving any program tonight.
And Mayor Pro Tem, if I could clarify that. So the council directed that staff move forward with a survey. What the item on the agenda is tonight is to accept the grant funds, which would pay for the survey.
Exactly, but so it's only for
the grant.
But the grant is only to fund the survey.
At this point. Correct.
The grant funding does not mean there's any program being adopted.
That's correct.
To fund a survey.
Or any other costs directed by the council that may be incurred.
But tonight, the council would not be approving a cannabis program. That would have to return for the future.
Exactly. I just want to be very clear. I want to be very clear on that because I hear everything that James said. So I want to make sure that I explain my reasoning that it's just to support funding for a survey.
Are we seeing this survey?
Correct.
Before it goes out.
The survey's already out.
Okay.
So you will be getting the results probably as our last conversation with the company that did the survey. They should be done probably this week with all of the results and the tallying of those, and then we'll schedule that for a council meeting or presentation.
And when the survey returns, would be an opportunity for the council to provide direction on whether or not to direct staff to develop a program.
Well, when is that
If
coming back?
council so desired. That I don't know. It's dependent upon when the survey analysis can be completed, which is a bit unknown at this moment. And it's also dependent on when the council directs it to return.
Okay.
Councilmember Kraut.
I was just going to say, I understood exactly what our city manager just shared with us, that this funding is to pay for the formulation of a retail cannabis licensing program, all the steps it takes along the way to get there, which we're starting to have to do like the survey in order to make a decision whether we want to move forward with it or not. So this is just a mechanism to recapture those funds. And for that, I'm in favor of it.
Councilmember Albright.
Yes, I appreciate the clarification on that because this is just a survey. It's not any way directed toward approving it or not approving it. And we're concerned. We wanted to hear back from the community how they felt about it. Take that into consideration. It's an important decision, and it's not something to be taken lightly. So this is really replacing money that we've already spent and paying ourselves back for the cost of that survey. And then we can evaluate at the time when we get the results of the survey. Thank you.
Thank you. Just let me ask the question, if I may. What is the cost of the survey? Because I didn't see that.
Approximately $30,000.
Okay, and the amount of the grant is that we're seeking?
We were awarded $125,000.
Okay, and so I'm going to ask the follow-up question just to make sure I'm clear, because I supported going out to the public to get a survey to, no matter what my view may be, to hear what the public would respond. I heard additional information from Councilmember Kraut other than just a survey. So is there consideration that this $125,000 is going to be used for implementation or staff time to prepare code or other work? I'd like to know that now.
So the money would be available on direction of the council. So again, once the survey is brought back to the council and if the council desires to move forward, there would be additional costs. The grant would then cover those additional costs. If the council decides not to move forward, we suspend the grant and we use only those funds that we've already expended.
Thank you. Yes, Councilor.
Just to clarify and add to that, as I read the grant program, it also covers things like staff time.
Right.
So all of the time that Michael spends preparing this, even a portion of the time that we spend here at our city council meeting, there's many ways that we can, as a city, use this grant to recoup costs that we spend in talking about this program, whether we move forward or not.
Good point. And again, I think it's a consensus that we want to make sure this is solely though for related to the information we're going to get back as council, not going beyond that at this point. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, we have a hand up.
Okay,
Norma
please.
Citron.
I'm sorry.
Norma Citron. She wants to speak.
Okay, please, welcome.
Thank you very much. I was surprised to see this on the agenda. And I am surprised also that you're getting surveys back. We didn't receive any survey, and we'd like to know how the surveys were sent and how quickly they're getting back. I don't know whether you can answer that now, but we need to be assured that this is only related to asking whether or not we would like to have cannabis in our city, not related to anything else. So if I could have an answer about, have the surveys been sent? Are they coming in? And to what portion of the population were they sent? We didn't get any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And would you like to address or respond, Michael?
I would actually like to confirm with the city attorney that we can, only because that specific item is not on the agenda.
Yeah, the grant though was used to pay for the survey, so that'd be fine to respond briefly and lay out the survey's parameters.
Okay, so in a nutshell, the survey company that we hired prepared both a phone and text survey, and they used registered voters to identify a certain, not a population, but just a citywide survey. They reached out to individuals directly. It was not just a general survey monkey or anything that was done at random or completely at random or just posted on the website. So they did that intentionally to be able to maintain control over the survey and control for unique responses.
And, oh, go ahead, Mayor. Sorry, Mr. City Manager.
Wow, thank you, Mayor.
You want to switch seats? Let's,
And just to add to that, staff felt that this was such a sensitive subject and that it was important to hire a firm that was one of the best in the states. So this state doesn't just do surveys in regards to cannabis. They survey populations throughout the state on all types of issues, whether that's sales tax or property tax or utility user tax or whatever that might be. This is a statistically valid survey. And so when they come back to the council, they will talk about their methodology, how that population was selected, the variance, the degrees of variance and so forth. So to the point of the question, not everybody in town received a survey, and based on statistics, not everybody does need to receive a survey to get those numbers that account for the demographics of the community.
One more point, very briefly. Anyone who was not selected as a survey participant through the statistically valid survey method may still provide their input to the city council through the standard public comment process, including emails or any of the other methods to get to the council.
such as public comment tonight.
Correct.
All right. I was going to ask, did staff, and I'm looking at you, both of you, Kendon and Michael, get to review or make comments on the survey before it went out? We did. Okay. And I presume when it comes back to us at some point, we're also going to see the full survey, not just the results.
So I assume very similar to the presentation that we had from the Community Services Department at our last meeting. You'll see the types of questions that were asked and then the data that was gleaned from those questions.
Okay, thanks very much. And if I heard right, just to clarify, only phone and text, not by mail, not by email, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, because some people may be registered voters, but may not use their phone in that method. So that may be some of the issue with regard to a percentage of the population. I'm sure the survey company will tell us what that percentage might be. All right, other council questions or comments on this item? Any members of the public online raising their hands?
Mr. Mayor, Norma has her hand up again.
Oh,
do you want me to bring her in again? I think she says.
She's already spoken on this item in public comments.
Nope, hang on. This is Mark Citron. Do I get to
I'd
speak
like
also?
to go from Mark Citron, who is a resident of Calabasas. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm just letting you know that I find it unbelievable that you're going to accept a $125,000 grant to pay for a $30,000 survey. So we all know what the rest of that money is going to go to, and it's going to go to, unless you're planning to give back the rest of it. Maybe if you decide not to have this, then you give back the rest. You let me know if that's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wish to speak on this item?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. I think we have given direction. I don't know if this requires. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. May I please have a motion to approve consent items 1 through 5? We're still on consent.
Well, all right, I'll just cast my negative vote on 5.
Right. You can.
I'll second that.
Who made the first? I didn't hear. Oh, I didn't hear. Thank you. Then first and second, all in favor of items 1 through 4. May I ask for a friendly moment on that so we can vote separately?
Yes.
In favor. Okay. Let's vote consent items 1 through 4. All in favor indicate by saying aye. 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 James, will you and I on 1 through 4?
Yes.
Okay. And now we'll move to have a motion on item number 5, consent item 5.
So moved.
So moved. Item moved and seconded by Councilmember Albrecht. This time, all in favor indicate by saying aye. 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 All opposed?
Nay.
Okay, passes 4-1 on number 5. All right, now we'll move on to new business unless anyone needs to replay. We're good. Okay. We'll move on to item number 6, which is the authorization to award a contract to FS Contractors Inc. under CIP number 23-24-01 for Wild Walnut Park improvements and approve additional funding allocation. And we are pleased to have our Community Service Director, Erica Green, to present. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, council members, members of the public. So I'm here tonight, as Mayor Shapiro mentioned, to award a contract to FS Contractors Inc. for the Wild Walnut Park improvements. I will be giving a brief presentation on some background and where we are today. So I'm starting from September 2020, which is when the temporary dog park opened by direction of the council to reject bids that was given. So we had a temporary dog park established and funding sources sought. So we had a application that was not submitted for LA County Regional Park and Open Space District for the project. So in 2021 and 2022, staff worked with the landscape architect to value engineer the project and revise the plans, and an ADA accessible parking space was added. In August of 2022, staff presented value engineered plans to City Council and was given the direction to conduct additional public engagement and approve the budget. So since September 22 through present, staff conducted numerous public engagement and presented to the Parks, Recreation, and Education Commission, and from the feedback designed new construction plans. Staff reapplied for the grant funding from LA County and was approved in June 2023. That's a typo with 2022, receiving the executed grant agreement in August of 2023. The bid was posted on August 25th, 2023 and closed September 13th with 3 responsive bidders. FS Contractors was responsive and the lowest bidder. So in 2019, this was the original plan for the dog park. As you can see here, this switchback to go up to the high topography to the play area was what caused the additional cost to build the park, construct the park. So that's when we went back to the plans and had moved the playground. So some of these are the original amenities. You can see there was the natural look that the community had requested at that time. In 2022, this is when we had moved the playground to the flatter area of the park to reduce costs of doing the switchback and grading up to this playground area. When that was proposed to City Council, they asked that we do public engagement to decide where we can move that play equipment instead of being so close to Mulholland Highway. So after much public engagement, we ended up with this plan, which included a larger playground area, large dogs and small dog play space, and leaving this area for maybe some overflow parking or additional recreation in the future. The Walnut Grove, we will have picnic tables under there. So this is the plan that the community had requested and we agreed on. Some of the new amenities. So when we conducted the public engagement in 2023 or 2022, the community really liked some of the things that we had originally, but so we kept those. We added shade structure. Some of the natural elements remained. We will be having more of a concrete benches and concrete tables. There's the water fountain and then the dog waste areas. With the playgrounds, we wanted to keep some of the natural elements, but there was a high demand for a more traditional playground structure. This is a structure called Branching Owl, which is basically, we didn't want such a huge obstructive structure in the park where everyone enjoys its natural beauty. So we tried to get more of a thin, natural colored and include these wood elements. So the bid included 2 options. This area that we're pointing to is a concrete slab that can hold temporary restrooms or a permanent restroom. So the bid included option A, which was temporary, and option B is permanent restrooms. The permanent restroom is a prefabbed restroom that you see here. It is a 1 stall, 1 urinal, 1 toilet, all gender restroom. The temporary option is building this enclosure and having temporary restrooms placed and maintained weekly. So here you can see the approved budget by City Council was allocating ARPA funds of $800,000 to the project and the LA County funds in the amount of $315,000, bringing us to $1,115,000 for the project. This is FS Contractors bids here. So the bid amount for the temporary restrooms, as you can see, is almost 1.1 million. The bids did not include contingency. So with 15% contingency, we're adding that 164, almost 165,000 to make it almost 1.3. With the permanent restroom option, it was about 1.3 with 200,000, bringing it a little over 1.5. So tonight we would ask the council to either way to move forward with the permanent or temporary restrooms with this additional funding allocation. So that's our council action. That is the end of my presentation. I do have Jeff Maxwell here, who is the from JMD Architect, so he can answer any technical questions regarding the restrooms. So we're open for any questions.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to council comments and questions, starting with Councilmember Kraut.
Yeah, just one quick question on the restroom. The unisex single door restroom appears to have a larger room behind it. First question, I guess, would be, what is that room? And second question is there any way that we can get a second restroom in that structure?
That extra room is for utilities. It's plumbing access and the electrical panel that services the room. We purposely chose a building that had a low footprint because of the space constraints at the site. There are larger restroom buildings that have male and female restrooms. But we, in this instance, selected that one for its smaller footprint.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Kraut.
I did.
Councilmember Albrecht. I was clicking. It's red. It's like red, like green. Okay.
I got to tell you, it's a long time coming. I feel like I'm brushing off the dust. It's been years, so I'm so happy to be a part of potentially going forward with this tonight. I do have a number of questions. And one of it, Councilman Kraut brought up the bathroom. I was going to do the same thing, but I was going to ask, we recently were at the League of California Cities in Sacramento last week, and I did see a vendor that had prefab bathrooms that were pretty cool. Look like permanent bathrooms, really well built. And on the recommendations from staff was to have the choice of bathroom prefab or not, permanent or temporary, I should say. How do you feel about prefab versus building a bathroom from scratch up? Maybe there's a savings in there, maybe there isn't.
Yeah, that's being cost effective, yes, with the same results. So the prefab bathrooms are beautiful. I think they'll meet the needs of the community and with cost savings.
Thank you for that. I also see, looking back on history a little bit with this, you know, it's an odd thing, having followed this for so many years. It's an interesting piece of property. It's difficult to configure. You've done a great job of configuring it, topography wise. It's also with the construction of Measure M and doing Mulholland, the whole thing really, its time has come. And this stop and start that went on for all these years for all the various reasons, some out of our control, COVID and other reasons, actually the park benefited from it. And having you part of it. And we've taken the lead on this. I really like the way it comes out. Couple other items. As far as the dogs are concerned, I like the play equipment, and I know we're going to be happy with that and the surface and all of that in the shade areas. But as far as the dogs are concerned, one, are the rattlesnake barriers down below, so there's no danger from them? Or have we considered that?
Yeah, we considered that, and the fence design includes kind of what we call critter fence at the bottom. There's wire mesh on a board fence, a 4-board rail fence, and there's wire mesh that I guess it's a finer netting texture at the bottom for snakes.
would that rust out over time? Or is that to a degree permanent?
To a degree, it's galvanized. So probably 15 years, 10, 15 years,
Okay.
there will be some maintenance that,
Okay.
yeah.
That's good to know. Also, I've been there myself. I've been to many dog parks, as many of us have. One of the common uses on the ground are chips. And it's not good for all the dogs. A lot of the dogs, the chips get stuck in their paws. They take it home. It just creates a bit of a problem on a variety of levels. Is it possible we could use something like loam? And when you look at the dog park over in Las Virgenes, it's basically dirt. So, I mean, there's nothing to brag about the surface there, but there's also shade, so nothing can grow there. So possibly with the sun, we could get a better surface, low maintenance grass of some kind, rather than the chips. Would that be a consideration?
We could, yes, that could be a consideration. There might be areas that if we left the native grasses may withstand the traffic, or it may get worn down. A lot of times we use the chips just because it turns the dirt. And it's a little more, it's cleaner than the dirt. I think that may be something that we have to experiment with, and maybe the Parks Department,
Maybe experiment, a little bit chips and a little bit.
Yeah, right. And kind of see how it unfolds and then add more chips or.
Yeah, I think what we were trying to do too was there was multiple community members that we were trying to benefit. So there are a lot of people who want to keep that native, natural look, and do not want grass or do not want a park that's like a Gates Canyon, basically. So we tried to keep that natural element, one, because of cost, two, because of that request from the community to keep it more natural and keep that look. So we're really just trying to please all areas of the community. And that was one of the strong points in the survey, was really to keep those aesthetics and the topography as it is.
The chips, can you make them smaller? Do they come in different sizes?
Yeah.
I'm trying to be picky. Last question, I think that covers it. Yeah, it's going to be canine friendly with the rattlesnake protection and maybe looking into the chips.
Yeah.
So thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Mazacha.
Yes. So I'm assuming staff is recommending the permanent. Is that what?
I'm not. I'm leaving that to your direction.
Okay. I don't like the temporary because it looks like an Andy Gump basically, and I can just see all the problems it would have. But there are two of them. Is this going to be the way ours looks? Is that two, or is there more back?
There's two in that photo that we chose. That would be up to our budget. We can have an ADA accessible and a standard. It'll fit those two in there. Yes.
The issue I have with the permanent is that you're only showing one. And if it's crowded and there is a line outside, or if, without getting into any details, there's a problem with the bathroom, there's nowhere for anyone else to use a bathroom. Usually if you have two, that gives someone another option. So have we, I don't know if they're industry experts on this kind of thing, but that's the only thing that gives me pause about the permanent, is that there's only one.
Yeah. And unfortunately like Jeff had mentioned, we have a small footprint that can put that concrete slab next to the driveway, next to the playground. So really we had to fit a prefab onto a predetermined size of the slab. So if we go any larger, we're not going to be able to fit a
Well,
there.
I kind of be interested in hearing from the public, because it is a tougher option when there's only one.
And the price is going to go extremely higher.
I mean, if it's a question of making it a nice, usable park versus putting in an Andy Gump that no one's going to want to use, I would be willing to spend the extra money. The problem, again, I'm having is not only is there an extra cost to putting in a second permanent one, which is less troubling to me, but you're telling me there's no room for it.
Right.
is there a model that would be smaller where we could do two permanents side by side? Like eliminating a urinal option in one? I'm just throwing it out.
That one, this one was the smallest that I have seen available. We looked at 3 different companies. Many of them have similar products. This one, in our thoughts, was this where we sourced it had a better look for wild walnut. There's a lot of features that you can add, customization. We customized like the siding on the outside just to give it a more wood natural look. To go bigger, to do 2 bathrooms, it doubles the size of the footprint.
I understand that. You see my trepidation in putting in just one.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, well, I guess we'll hear from the public and my colleagues. I mean, I suppose, I don't know. I don't know which one I do if it's only going to be one permanent. So that would be my only hang up on that.
Say something, Councilmember Pizagian, at the Bark Park, we only have one porta potty.
But that's going to be that's a much smaller operation. This is a park that is going to have not only the Bark Park, but a children's play area, and will be, I'd say, many times more crowded from what we anticipate. That's a 1 acre, less than an acre park.
Sure.
I'm just saying, I mean, I think it's going to be very popular, and I think you're going to have people needing that bathroom, but I'm done with my questions.
Mayor Pro Tem Weintraub.
I brought this up a few years ago. And I forgot to reach back out to staff, but I think that having bathrooms is obviously needed. It's not like a traditional statement, but I'm very nervous about not having wide open access to bathrooms, especially with a park on Mulholland. And I know there are instances throughout California and the nation where people have to get keys at city facilities. We have issues at some of our other bathrooms, and I want to make sure that the people using the park, the bathrooms are always accessible, clean, and safe. And I think we have to look at like creative methods. If it's a key fob and we give the codes out, I mean, I think we really have to look outside of the box to make sure that these bathrooms, I don't want to have issues that we have at other facilities. I want to make sure that, I mean, our facilities are safe and everything, but every so often we have an instance, and I agree this park is going to be very heavily trafficked and used. And I think there's ways for people to either get a code, a fob, or something just to keep these bathrooms safe. And then my other quick question, it dawned on me also up here, are wood chips, aren't we supposed to be getting away from them because of fires? I'm looking at fire, but I'm pretty sure like in those, when they talked about when we have to redo our landscaping, it was because I have wood chips in my backyard. And that was like one of the things I remember thinking that I would have to start transitioning away from that. So anyone can answer that?
Yeah. We had that question come up when the project went through plan check. We specified engineered wood fiber, which is like playground chips for the dog park. That has a degree of less flammability than standard garden mulch.
Okay.
And there's some data that we provided a data sheet. It still can catch on fire, but it has a much less flammability rating, essentially.
And then what about access to the bathrooms? I know, like I've read a lot about it in other communities.
Yeah, there are features like a keypad where you would have to have a code, controlling who has the code. Maybe, there's all kinds of advantages and disadvantages to whatever mode of security we could add. I think that would just be a practical discussion of what's most practical.
Thank you. And oh, it's great, by the way. I'm very excited. As we've all said, this is long awaited. So we're really thrilled that this is coming to fruition.
We are too.
And I am too. Great comments and questions. Matter of fact, Mayor Pro Tem just absolutely helped me cross off a few of mine, but I will reiterate, I'm concerned also that it is safe. And that was my going way back to when we first discussed this park and what we were going to do with it. My biggest concern is safety along that corridor, even on a weekend where it's traversed by a large amount of public going through Mulholland Highway all the way to the beach. And obviously don't want to have it be something that's attractive. I don't know if we're planning on having staff there during the days when it is open, or security, and those might be alternative options to help keeping it safe, and have only staff or security have that code, which provides a double safety measure. But I'll defer. There definitely should be something in mind. I don't want to have it just be open and again, you don't know. We don't want to be in any bad situation with this. And as far as the wood chips, I defer to the fire department and I defer to you. But absolutely, it's not just that they could catch on fire; it's also the fact that they can be blown. And in that area, that's a very hilly, potentially dangerous area with fire. We had a fire there years ago. Right across from the high school. So I'd want to see if there's alternatives that are safe and still work and are good and cost effective. If it's an issue, when I hear it could catch fire even at a high temperature, well, all these fires become high temperature in our city, unfortunately, over time. And then I'll get to the most important thing, which I'm going to beat Rosa to it probably. When will this start, the project, if we approve it tonight?
It's technically a 60-day project, but that depends on lead times for the prefabbed restroom and the playground. If there's long lead times for that, I can't give an estimate.
Oh, okay. Then the next question probably won't either, which I'm sure was, when will it be completed? That was same question.
Yeah, we're hoping at the beginning of the year, but we'll see with the lead times.
Okay, and while the comments about restrooms and having potentially more than one or a different type, I respect those. I don't want to hold this up any longer, so I would be very supportive of the one permanent restroom. And if we have the financial ability and wherewithal, and I'd always look to our CFO to guide us in that regard, and our city manager, then that would be my recommendation to immediately move forward. Any other council questions? We have one public member wishing to speak, at least now, who's been on the phone and is now present. Rosa Besser, welcome. Last time you were here with about 30 four-legged friends, I believe.
Yes, it's been a while.
Welcome.
My name is Rosa Besser, longtime Calabasas resident. I went into my files and lo and behold, I found this sign that it's at least 4 or 5 years old, when a bunch of us came to city council. Let's get it done. And yes, there are certain little issues. We like the dirt. Okay. We love our dogs. They can go into the dirt, get rid of the chips. I will forewarn you that in the future, we will ask for an enlargement of the dog area. There's a hill, dogs can handle it. And so can we. Please, council members, let's move on this. Whatever you decide on the bathrooms, say okay. Let's just get that shovel in the dirt. Bow wow.
Thank you very much. I have no other cards from public speakers. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone online who wishes to speak on this item?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, then I'll turn to my colleagues. Any final questions or comments? Council members,
I didn't hear anyone answer my question. I think you did maybe on the one or two. Anyone have any comment? I mean, I don't want to hold it up either, but I do want to hear.
I don't want to hold it up either, and I have a creative idea, so I'd like to make a motion.
How about discuss you can make a motion.
I can make a motion and then we can discuss it. I think it might solve the problem. I would move that we authorize and award the contract to FS Contractors under CIP number 232401 for Wild Walnut Park, and approve an additional funding allocation for a 15% contingency, and choose a permanent restroom option and further direct staff to explore a second restroom, most likely in the same building, and see if that can be achieved within less than 50% of the contingency.
Is there a second
I'll
to that?
second that.
Okay, now council discussion. Did that help? Or did you want to discuss it?
Well, that's fine. I mean, we've already been told there's no room for it, so I don't think staff's gonna be able to find the location, but that's fine. Maybe they could take one more look at it.
Councilman Brownback? Okay. Again, I'm fine with it. I don't want to hold up the project and have the second option come back to us as a holdup for the project. So that would be my only comment.
I would agree. And I think the way I've stated it, if it fits within 50% of the contingency, they have direction to move forward. If it doesn't, they move forward with a single hole restroom.
Okay. So we have a motion, a second, and I'll say all in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Again, thank you very much. We look forward to moving forward. Look forward to seeing great progress. Thank you. All right. We have continued business. Does anyone need a break or are we going forward? Good. We're going forward. Item number 7, discussion of fire safety, since we were discussing it, and resilience code standards. The Planning Commission reviewed this item on June 15th, 2023, and provided recommendations to City Council. Michael Klein, our Community Development Director, and Sparky Cohen will present the item. Thank you. And you have a special guest. And 2 guests, actually.
We do. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Before I begin, I do want to point out everyone that we do have up here. We've brought in a lot of experts on this subject tonight. To my immediate right, we have Bob Woodward. He is the principal at M6 Consulting. His firm does all the plan check for building and safety. Very knowledgeable about building code requirements, fire code requirements, etc. To Bob's right, we have Sparky Cohen, our building official, also in charge of our building and safety department, and ultimately in charge of the plan check process for the city of Calabasas. In the audience, we have Joseph Human from the LA County Fire Department, who is also part of the overall process for reviewing new structures and built in the city. So he is available tonight as well for questions. And I don't know if we have them online yet, but we should have a couple other members of the LA County Fire Department online as well.
They are online, Michael, if you need them.
Perfect. So with that, I'll get into the actual presentation. So overall, what we are going to discuss tonight are fire code standards. This was requested by the City Council for the Planning Commission to review and take a look at various fire code and safety requirements as it relates to building within the city of Calabasas. So with that, what we're going to focus on, and this is all information that was presented to the Planning Commission, what we're going to focus on is the California Building Code requirements, LA County Fire Code requirements, a brief discussion on the fire hazard severity zone, home fire hardening, and then finally the recommendations from the Planning Commission. So with that, looking at a broad brush overview, the state of California has California building codes. These are located within Title 24. Within Title 24 of the Code of Regulations, there are the uniform standards for constructions of buildings. This applies throughout all of California. There's a uniform requirement for construction of new buildings and modification of existing buildings, and they have to follow the requirements that are established by this Title 24. Now, local jurisdictions can adopt their own amendments. The city of Calabasas recently, with the adoption of the current code requirements, which are updated every 3 years, adopted a handful of local amendments. They're mostly administrative, so not too many amendments to the actual building requirements. Within Title 24 and the building code requirements, within Title 24, you have the building code, and then you also have the fire code. Again, this applies to all construction throughout California. And ultimately, the important thing here is that it's enforced jointly by both the city of Calabasas and LA County Fire Department. The ultimate intent of the fire codes within this is to prevent fires and or limit the spread of fires. And just again, from a broad perspective, the fire standards that are located within the building code and the fire codes really relate to the type and use of building materials, fire prevention, and ultimately fire containment. So taking a quick look at the LA County Fire Code requirements, Title 32 of LA County Code stipulates those requirements. Again, it ultimately is implemented by the local jurisdictions, and here specifically by the fire department. The fire department, from a building standpoint process within the city of Calabasas, the fire department is involved in the review of construction of new buildings within the city at several different stages throughout the process. When an entitlement is submitted to the city, the fire department is involved at the DRC, what we call the Development Review Committee level. So this is before an entitlement is granted. The plans and the project are routed to the fire department as well as to our building and safety department so that everyone can weigh in on the project scope. Mr. Human, for example, is assigned to the Calabasas area. So he'll see all the entitlements that get submitted to the city and weigh in on fire code requirements. And then again, at the plan check stage. So before building permits are issued and during the plan check, the fire department is also reviewing projects. And here they actually get into the very specific details in terms of the materials that are required, fire suppression that is proposed to be installed, et cetera. And so building permits are not issued until the fire department has also approved the plans for construction. So the one thing that I want to point out on this slide, the LA County Fire Department, their specific areas of enforcement include the requirements for fire hydrants, water supply, fire equipment access, lot identification, so how and where you display your address, weed abatement, and then landscape and defensible space. These are not things that the city enforces. These are enforced specifically by the fire department. Taking a quick look at fire hazard severity zones. This is established by the state fire marshal. And the important thing here is that the fire hazard severity zones established or are determined at the state level by hazards, not necessarily risk. And when they talk about hazards, what they're talking about is they take a look at a specific area and they look at fire history, vegetation, predicted flame length, ember production, topography, and climate. All of those combined are what they evaluate to determine the fire severity zone. So what does that ultimately mean for the city or for properties within a severity zone? It establishes building requirements. So based on the type of zone that you're in, the building requirements may change. For example, building in the very high fire severity zone requires ignition resistant building materials. May not be as stringent if you're not in the very high fire severity zone. The severity zones include 3 different categories. There's moderate, high, and very high. I have an image here. This is from the state, from the state fire marshal. So it is missing Mount Calabasas. I want to point that out. But it does include the rest of the city. And as you can see, based on this, the red that the city is in indicates that the entire city is in the very high fire severity zone. And of course, we apply that to Mount Calabasas as well. So just kind of looking at, from an image standpoint, what does that ultimately mean? Like I mentioned, certain building requirements are increased based on the zone that you're located in. And so, for example, just taking a quick look at an image like this, which is a typical single family home with a detached garage. If you're in the high severity zone, you'll have an increased requirement for defensible space around the property. You are going to be required to use upgraded windows, so tempered glass windows. You are required to use non-combustible or ignition resistant exterior materials. You have to use a Class A roof. Attic vent screens are required, rain gutter leaks. guards are also required. All of these help protect the structure or prevent ignition sources around the structure. Solid core exterior doors is another example. So these are just some examples of additional requirements that construction in this particular zone are subject to. Then moving on to another issue that was brought up at the Planning Commission stage has to do with home fire hardening. The reason why this is important is because 90% of the city's housing stock was built prior to the year 2000. It was not until after 2000 when the California Building Code and associated fire code really started getting more strict on building requirements, and again, focusing in on that ignition resistant material. So there's a lot of homes within the city of Calabasas, 90%, that are not constructed to the current fire code requirements. So home fire hardening is the process of making retrofits to an existing structure that will help make that structure more resistant to fire. This image will show you a couple of examples of what that looks like. Again, that could be when replacing your roof, although that's a very expensive proposition, but certain things like keeping your rain gutters clean or adding that guard to your rain gutter, taking a look at the vents that go into your attic and putting up proper screens. And another very important concept of home fire hardening is also just general property maintenance. We've seen a lot of properties at greater risk, even if the structure itself is built nicely. If you store a lot of debris and material around your property that is subject to ignition, then your house is at a greater risk. From here, the city, we do want to point out that there are a handful of resources for homeowners to take a look at for home fire hardening. All of this is on the city's website. You could start at the emergency preparedness webpage. The Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains also includes information about home hardening as well as some resources. The city also there's a nonprofit called EPIC, which stands for Emergency Preparedness in Calabasas, and they will go around to homeowners in Calabasas and provide a checklist of home hardening that they can do. And then, of course, there's also CAL FIRE, which has an abundance of information on how to deal with wildfire issues. So finally, getting to the Planning Commission. As I had mentioned, the Planning Commission reviewed all of this information. We had a meeting on June 15th, and the result of that meeting was a motion by the Planning Commission for the council to look at and consider the following topics. And that is ultimately what we are here tonight, is to get direction from the City Council. The Planning Commission asked or recommended that the City Council look at things like communications during an emergency. And I have in here a sort of a bullet, which is at our level, we see this as the purview of the Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness Department. The Planning Commission also suggested that the city look at considering a requirement that new construction provides backup power. This is something that we could look at adding to the building code or to the planning requirements. Identify sites for shelter during a fire. Our safety element, which was actually just updated, includes different emergency shelters, not necessarily specific to fires, but emergency shelters. So that was already identified in our safety element. Consider a requirement for rooftop rotary sprinklers in all new development. Again, that's something that could be looked at and considered as a building code requirement. Consider prohibiting gas hookups in new development. Also something that could be looked at as a building code requirement. And finally, consider prohibiting combustible plant material within 5 feet of structures. And I did put on here that, as I had mentioned earlier, landscaping requirements ultimately are under the purview of the LA County Fire Department. So with that, staff, that concludes this overall presentation, and we are seeking further direction from council. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a handful of people here that are experts on this issue and are all available for questions.
Thank you for that report. Appreciate it. And thanks to the Planning Commission. And I'm sure we all have a lot of questions for the experts here. Let me start with Council Member Kraut.
Well, thank you for that. I do have a couple of questions. Mr. Woodward, seeing as you're here, what's your thoughts on asking for additional code requirements locally? Would we do that with local amendments? And what's your general impression on whether we as a city have the resources to be doing that?
The city on a regular basis every 3 years adopts the current version of the California Building Code, and we do that with some amendments as well. So that would be a good opportunity to make this type of an amendment if the council desires, and with some recommendations, probably specifically from staff as to what that would look like.
Okay, but we passed that code cycle. The next one is coming up in about 2.5 years.
That's correct.
Okay. And then in battery storage, which was one of the recommendations of the Planning Commission, to have that emergency backup power, our current code does require that all new construction be energy storage ready. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And are there other cities that have required the battery at this point?
Not that I'm aware of. Most cities have facilitated that as part of the solar permitting process. In other words, solar ready is a requirement of the code. Some people elect to have a battery as an energy storage system, essentially for backup power, but that tends to be more of an elective option for the homeowner, whoever's installing it.
Okay. And then for the fire department, rooftop sprinklers, would love to get your thoughts on, first of all, how that affects your water supply and their effectiveness. And also, as I understand it, there's no NFPA standard for the design and installation of these systems. So could you tell us more about them and where you see their appropriateness?
Joseph Human, fire prevention.
Thank you.
That is not a standard that has been implemented for fire suppression or creating fire resistance, particularly rooftop sprinklers. Typically, we would lean towards mitigations similar to the fire hardening, which would be a Class A roof, or as some people would believe, they have a non-combustible roof with metal, but those would serve more the purpose for mitigating fire atop of a roof more than a sprinkler would.
So for like a wood roof or something like that, not a non-combustible roof?
Correct. Wood roofs, assuming that they're still present in homes in the area, those would be opportunities to be able to upgrade those roofs to Class A roofs, potentially at the time of permitting, requiring those roofs to be required to meet the standard for fire resistance. But again, that's not something that's ever been presented as a means of mitigation for stopping fire spread atop of a roof.
Okay, great. And then I think the last question is for our city attorney, which is prohibiting gas. I understand the California Restaurant Association versus City of Berkeley ended up with an appeal.
Yeah, so in that case, the city of Berkeley adopted an energy usage ordinance that prohibited new gas appliances. They drew a lawsuit from the California Restaurant Association. They lost to the Ninth Circuit. Last I heard, they're considering appealing to either en banc at the Ninth Circuit or to the federal Supreme Court. It may be wise to see how that case shakes out before pursuing that type of approach.
So a new code change at this point would have to wait on that decision?
We wouldn't necessarily have to wait. That decision was just as to Berkeley's ordinance, but we would be vulnerable to a similar challenge if we were to move forward with that without seeing how that case shakes out. And notably, Berkeley did it on a climate change basis. We might try the fire angles, a different angle. We'd want to analyze that further.
Okay. All great challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albrecht.
Thank you. It's interesting, this gas hookup problem. We didn't have to think about this a couple of years ago, but suddenly it's obvious that it's a concern. And it probably is on the way out at some point, but we'll have to wait. I agree. Might have to wait until we make, wait till the court sorts it out. I really like some of the suggestions from the Planning Commission. There's areas of concern that we looked at that are I like all of them. I mean, some of them are pretty clear, you know, the 5 feet house hardening, so many of us have heard house hardening and how we go about it. I do have a question about maybe regarding the sprinklers for the roofs. What activates that? I mean, what if, you know, we're talking about a fire that might be 20 miles away, 15 miles away, coming closer, you got embers flying all over the place, and you want to prepare your roof and keep it wet and get the water going in advance. Can you activate that on demand, or does it have to be as a result of the heat?
Well, yes, heat is what actuates the sprinklers in most interior spaces. There are some instances where there are more advanced sprinkler systems that are utilizing heat signature to be able to actuate a system, but that hasn't been accepted, to my understanding, anywhere within Los Angeles. Direct heat, removing what would be a link to the sprinklers being actuated, that would serve as the typical means of starting any sort of fire sprinkler system.
So you could activate it on demand?
Well, it can be activated on demand. For instance, if you don't take your typical fire sprinkler system and you were to have more of a cooking application, for instance, an Ansel system, that's something that would be actuated by somebody pulling some sort of lever. But to serve the purpose for a fire or stopping the fire spread atop of a roof, that is not a general mitigation that has been a practice in the past.
What about those residences that have solar?
Solar is a unique.
You can't. Most of the roof is covered with the solar, or at least one side of the house.
The unique thing about solar is, so at the time of solar panels being installed, there are requirements for access atop of the roof for firefighters to be able to fulfill their operational needs. Additionally, the solar is supposed to be shut down anytime there's a fire, because it is directly connected to the energy of the household. So if there is a fire, that's going to be something that is a component that is removed immediately. And if there is any sort of charge in the solar panel or the wiring, to my understanding, that is something that is not a fatal wattage that would be disseminated should something disrupt that sort of that line.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And the new fire safe regulations are excellent. I really think the Planning Commission did a great job. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Pizzaggi.
With regard to the Planning Commission recommendations here that are listed, one thing that's missing is projected costs for the homeowner, because as we all know, the homeowner is going to pay for this, if or the cost will be passed along to a potential homeowner if it's being sold by somebody, a developer, or even someone who's put the value into the house. My concern on that is, are these really cost effective versus what you're getting out of them? And then we're already in the housing market pricing out anyone but the highest income people from home ownership. And if this is adding to that burden, then I have to do a cost benefit analysis. So would it be possible for staff, not tonight, but at a future time, to come back and tell us what the projected each item would be as far as adding cost to the house, construction and or value of the house? So with that, the other question I have, so you guys can do that, I take it, just to project.
Yeah, we could do that.
The other, because some of these, like, for example, it will be a little more expensive for a larger house, but not that much more. If you're putting something into it, it won't necessarily vary that much from a small house to a big house in some of these. I had when you say something like communications during an emergency, purview of the public safety and emergency preparedness department, what does that mean? That you're not recommending that we look at this?
No, what that means is that if there was direction to look at that, then the request would be for that direction to go to that department, not to community development. Our purview is more on the building side.
Okay. But you see what I'm talking about is like, consider requirement, new construction provides backup power. And it says here can be added to the building code. Well, that, we know that, but I don't have a cost here. So that's what I would like to see next time.
Yeah, and again, we're seeking direction from the council if the council wants us to pursue or look into any of these recommendations.
Well, I consider all of them. I have some that I like better than others, but there are some that I think will be cost prohibitive to me where it's off the table because the benefit, I don't see that much of a benefit. It just depends. But anyhow, that's my input.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Weintraub.
I think that was a good request, just understanding the financial implications. So I'll wait for that to come back. I think the question regarding the gas hookups and waiting to see what happens with the Berkeley lawsuit is also a smart move. And I guess when the cost estimates come back, if you can like break it down single family and multifamily, because that would be, I imagine, different and how that would impact it. And then the rooftop sprinklers and all new development. I'm sorry if this was asked earlier. Is this a standard requirement now? Or, I mean, I know we would have to add it, but is that like the direction that things are going?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. So what would the benefit be of adding that?
The benefit could be questionable from a new development perspective. Mm-hmm. If a house is built to current standards, it would be constructed to ignition resistant standards. So that's the exterior of the home. That's what can ignite. Fire department would require a fire suppression system, which is fire sprinklers, and what we call housekeeping, which is defensible space and that type of thing. If you have a home that is constructed that way, there's really nothing available to burn. If you look at it that way. So the value of a rotary sprinkler putting water on the yard in a house, these fires burn so fast and so hot that if you put any amount of water on a roof or on some combustible material, the heat of the fire would basically evaporate the water and you'd still have something burning. Okay. Right. So the notion comes from some overseas locations where there may be fewer options. You don't have the ignition resistant construction. You just want to do anything you can to try to reduce the risk of something burning. It's like putting hose on your roof. And that's the reason there's not a standard for it.
Okay, so it's so important to hear that because we want to make sure that when we're adding to our code that we're practical and not onerous and doing what's like, here are the experts, I just want to understand it. So thank you.
If I can add one thing to Councilmember Albright and Councilmember Weintraub, the technology for rooftop sprinklers is not there yet. So you'd be creating a system with no approval mechanism. And we'd have to get very creative to put that in play. And so we shouldn't explore that any further right now.
Okay. We just want to make sure there's fire resistant construction.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
It will be. And just to add that one more, there could be unintended consequences that we want to avoid, which I think it was brought up earlier by Councilmember Kraut, which is the more rooftop systems you have running like that, you could be draining the water supply for the fire department when they need to tap into the system. So I would agree with the other comments. And
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report. Since you're all here, since we have the experts, I'm not going to let you go quite yet. I'm going to ask the staff's recommendation, and I'll start with you. Any recommendations that you have as to the items we're discussing that we should implement or consider implementing? And I appreciate the Planning Commission, but I'm asking from LA County Fire position.
Well, with a grain of salt, given my position, I will state that the house hardening consideration is very effective, because that is something we implement at the time of new construction build. The mitigations mentioned within the house hardening are very common practice in very high fire severity zones across the entire county. And if there are existing structures that do not fall under that standard of having dual glaze or tempered windows, Class A roofs, exterior that would withstand or be fire resistive, then certainly they would fall more susceptible to catching fire in an incident. The intent of these mitigations is to be able to slow the spread or withstand high heat without catching fire. So certainly, I believe the recommendations that have been made tonight are some of the standards for buildings within a very high fire severity zone.
Thank you very much. And then I'll look to staff as far as the Planning Commission specific recommendations we're discussing. I have my comments, and again, a lot of them have already been covered by my colleagues. I don't want to go over them or belabor that. But do you have any recommendations that you would strongly suggest we consider?
Well, we certainly covered a couple of the items, at least on this list, and some of the pros and cons. On this list, in addition, and it's not on this list, but home hardening, of course, is one of the most important things for homeowners to do. At our level, although it is in the purview of LA County Fire Department, the combustible plant material within 5 feet of structures is an important one that we could look at. We do have, so single family homes are not required to submit we're not required to have a landscape plan approved. We typically do require them to submit a landscape plan as part of an entitlement package. So if we update our zoning code to specify that anything within a specific distance, in this case, possibly 5 feet, would have to be non-combustible native plant material, then that's something that we could look into. And I think that would go a very long way. Because again, as was discussed, the structures with the building code and the fire code requirements are built to a very high level of fire resistance. It's the housekeeping around that structure that's also important and often forgotten. So I would take the closest look at the last requirement.
Okay, and a follow-up to that, if you could you clarify what the current defensible space code requirement is for us, which I believe it was reduced in the past year by LA County Fire.
I'll turn to Joseph Evan for that one.
Off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly everything, but one of the things that, and when I say everything, I don't remember the exact numbers, but one of the things that is, as mentioned, having dry or dead fuel near any residence or any structure for that matter, having piles of trash on the property in general, dry vegetation that would be yet to be cut back from a living tree. These fuel types, they present some of the greatest difficulties for spreading fire on site. So to speak to that, yes, having a defensible space, having really just a clear 100 feet, 200 feet, depending upon the lot itself, it does help to prevent the spread of fire.
Thank you very much. And again, I supportive of this coming back to us and considering something of this nature, but it would have to only be, unfortunately, for new, I would think, new construction and new developments, because given the city we live in, that could be an owner's requirement of current residents, and we're interested in making sure the city's safe and residents are safe, or I know we are, but not putting an undue burden on them. As far as the gas hookups, now my understanding, I looked to Mr. City Attorney, and it was not based, I don't solely on environment, but maybe it was. A couple of our neighboring cities, one in particular, passed that recently, correct?
Yeah, I think a couple of cities around here have also done the same.
Did they do it solely on environmental issues or also fire safety?
That I confess I'm not sure about. I didn't review the
I
ordinances.
thought it was their climate action plan
It is.
For one city.
for Agora.
Right, I'm talking about, there were a couple cities, I know, so.
I think some have had mixed motivations behind it.
Okay. All right, certainly, we can look at everything, but I'm not desirous of pushing that forward at this point, but certainly happy to look at it as the rotary rooftop sprinklers. Again, I've heard enough to know that that is not something we should consider at this time. I was going to ask, what I've heard is people who have large properties, and I'm not one of those, they use and they have implemented sprinkler systems in their yards far away from the home that help them as recent as the Woolsey fire and beyond, because they were able to use those as a defensible space way beyond the 200 or 300 feet from their homes. Is that something we should consider, or I will recommend that we can consider as an option if it's affordable for certain residents?
Would you like to?
I would say that that falls into the same category as the rooftop rotary sprinklers. It could be, some people might want it because it might protect their rear yard or their amenities, but that's not what's really important. What's really important is, again, is the property maintenance, making sure you don't have dry fuel to avoid combustible materials near your property.
Agreed. And my thought wasn't mandating it, was maybe coming up with a solution or working with businesses, public-private partnership to incentivize residents to have that type of opportunity. But we can talk about that another time. Everything else is great, and I have nothing more to add except thank you all for the report and the work of the Planning Commission as well. Any other council questions or comments? Mr. City Manager, you have a comment?
Mr. Mayor, I was just wanting to clarify any direction. So of these bulleted items, are there any that the council does want staff to bring back at this at a future agenda?
If I heard right, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
No,
okay. If I heard right, there was an interest in bringing back some items, and I had the same comments about cost with regard to the backup. Providing backup power and solar. As I heard, I think I heard a majority supporting that coming back with further information. And the others are already identified in the safety element, so that doesn't need to come back, right?
Well, can we get all 6 costs? There's only 6 of them.
One's already, 2 are.
There's only 3.
There's only 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, actually, if you count the gas. Item 1 and 3 are already. 1 is not coming to us at this point, and 3 is already identified in the safety element. So that wouldn't be coming back, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we're talking about 2, 4, 5, and 6, and 5 on the gas hookups. I heard a majority saying to wait to see how it plays out, if I'm correct. I don't want to misspeak for anyone. So we're really talking about 2, 4, and 6. If I'm right.
And if I can further add, it was shared with us that there is no real standard for rooftop rotary sprinklers, nor are they very effective. So I don't know if I have consensus there, but I think we can skip that one as well.
That was my recommendation.
Okay, I didn't hear.
That's what I was looking for too. That's what I thought I understood. I just wanted clarity on that.
I didn't hear a third voice, so I didn't say that. But okay, now we have 3. At least three.
So the council is requesting more information on item number 2 and number 6.
Right.
And I can answer item number 2 here. I don't mean to engineer from the podium here, but as I mentioned, the code already requires the infrastructure for the battery backup to be built into the house. That's in the California Electric Code currently for all new construction, single family homes, and for multifamily 4 stories or more. Multifamily 4 stories or more, you got to put the batteries in as well. So in a single family application or multifamily 3 stories and less, the only added cost is the cost of the battery. And I'll tell you, in a ballpark, it's $10,000 per battery per unit.
And is that the same for solar?
The solar is a separate requirement.
No, solar backup.
So
solar batteries.
So the solar is already required for a single family home.
Mm-hmm.
And already required for multifamily homes. So the solar requirement is in there. The battery backup is not yet just the infrastructure for it. So we're basically adding the cost of a battery. It's about $10,000 per unit.
And does that apply to apartment buildings and units as well?
3 stories and under, yes, it does. 4 stories and over, the code already requires them to have the battery installed for new construction.
I'm asking our experts, see, and commercial properties.
Sparky and Bob, if I'm mistaken here.
Commercial properties.
No, you're correct on that. And one of the things that I think also would need to come back with staff's a follow-up on this too, is understanding the relative benefit too of having the backup power. Are we asking people to essentially shelter in place during a fire, or are we evacuating? I think those are important considerations too. What message are we really conveying here?
Another consideration, and it's although we're discussing fire now, it's also earthquake. It's also shutoffs that happen, or we have that quite often in the city. Some issues in the past years, so the battery backup would benefit those homeowners in those situations as well.
One thing I do want to point out: battery backup is like for the one battery, the $10,000 battery that generally runs a handful of outlets. It will not run your HVAC. It'll keep your fridge on. It'll let you charge a phone and run some lights, but you're not keeping your house up in full operation.
Okay, well, this is why we need a full report.
So that's what, there could be a significant cost if the direction is to provide full power backup for a house to run at normal capacity.
I think I'm hearing a consensus that we'd like that information in 2 and 6, and also please give the minimum cost, which we may already have.
Before we go down that road, I think Mr. Woodward had a very valid point, which is why would we require it if we're actually asking them to evacuate? How is a battery backup going to, from a code required standpoint, help them, help us, help fire prevention? The battery backup would be there if they had a separate pump running their rooftop rotary sprinklers that we didn't add in. So what's the benefit of mandating a battery? And I just, knowing 10,000 is the minimum cost to keep a moderate number of receptacles or refrigerator going, I just can't see mandating it because it has no purpose.
The fire may be in another area that takes out generating power, so you don't have to evacuate, but you're stuck without power for a protracted period. Why don't we let's just get the report. I mean, let's just see what it is.
Councilman, if I could just add to that, I think the question is again, is the council wanting to require this for new homes? And again,
we want to, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think the consensus, we want to see the
base. Okay.
Yeah, that's what
we make a determination. While it's a recommendation and it may not be something we ultimately want to require. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. No, go. I'm sorry. I was saying, when you bring back the cost, can you give like a pro and con also? Like, instead of having this discussion now, like, you provide us with information, because I think you guys have ideas that this is necessary or not. So not just the cost, but if this is a good idea.
Yeah, we're definitely happy to do a more detailed discussion. This, again, was just something that went through Planning Commission, and we wanted direction from the council before we dive too far deep into any of these recommendations. But now, based on this, we will dive deeper into items 2 and 6.
And again, I'm deferring to Councilmember Kraut. I'm believing everything he said, that he already knows the minimum. So without going into much detail, all we need to know is I think we're asking what the cost would be, really, to get an idea, rather than doing a deep dive into it. But maybe I'm misspeaking for my
I think we need a
colleagues.
comprehensive thing. Peter brings up points where, what will we use it for? I mean, we don't have anything here except one line.
Part of my question to staff was, what do you recommend here? And that was for that purpose. If it's not something you recommend, it would be helpful to know that, even though the planning commission is recommending. Please.
So, yeah, to reiterate, I think right now, at this conversation level, our recommendation is that the code already requires a certain level of battery backup that is likely to be adequate for serving the purpose that it needs to serve. Based on this list, the one bullet item that really stands out the most, that certainly is worthy of further exploration, is the landscape requirement within 0 to 5 feet.
Councilmember Albright, your mic.
One of the factors we didn't take into consideration is that we've all been through Woolsey. We know the drama and the expectation that we would probably have to evacuate, but not every fire is going to be like that. So what if you have a fire that's going to, it's going to be much less. We're not going to have to evacuate, but the grid is down. So the grid is down. We didn't have TV. We didn't have telephones. We didn't have anything. We had transistor radios with batteries. But if we have a battery that's required that over, maybe it'll last a day and a half or 2 days, and at least we can get lights and communication, that might be satisfactory and important consideration to have.
So, and again, that falls into the category of, if someone wants battery or more battery, then it's something that would be useful for them. But is that serving the purpose of protecting the structure any further than what the other building code requirements are doing? From our perspective, adding the battery backup is not protecting the structure any further.
I understand.
Good point. That's a good point. I mean, it's probably elective.
Correct. Yeah.
Obviously, if there's council majority to go through with it, go through with it. I would certainly, my personal answer would be to provide more options for item number 6 and how we would, make that a citywide requirement. And I would disregard item number 2 personally.
Okay. I'll look to my colleagues over here to my left.
I'll say it again. I don't see why we can't get more information on these 2 items. We're discussing things now without even knowing.
The only thing I wanted to add to item number 6, there were some changes. When this comes back, if you could talk about like the requirements that are coming down from like the state or the county. We had that whole presentation and it was still like a few years out. So if you can just discuss that, that's the most important thing to me.
If I could add one thing we didn't talk about, and the good news is, in Calabasas, we continually issue remodel permits. We're blessed with a lot of work in the city. And every time they remodel their home, we get a bite at the apple to protect that home a little further. Every area they're working in, they need to upgrade. And many times it ends up where the whole home is getting hardened because they're doing a robust remodel to the house. So we are capturing many of our structures already, because our current fire codes for very high fire areas, severity zones are pretty rigid. We're doing really well with our current standards.
Okay, thanks very much. And I appreciate that. And I think we're unanimous about as to the home hardening up here. The 2 items asked for are 2 and 6 to come back with further information. And we probably, while comes out to us as planning commission recommendations, maybe a little background for us would have probably helped us wade through at least item 2 without having to go into detail up here and give recommendation. I think once we have the information, I'm not saying I'm going to mandate battery backup and certain amount for every home or every development, but at least let's have that discussion. And it's been asked for by a majority of the council at this point. So I think that's the direction. Okay. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, are there any members of the public? I know there aren't because I checked.
No, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Just wanted to verify it for the record. All right, we'll move on to informational for check register for the period September 2nd to 15th, 2023. Do I see any? Oh, okay, we're good. We'll move on to no questions regarding the check register. Seeing no hands. Any task force reports? We'll start with Councilmember Graf.
Sure. I was at the Cal Cities Conference with a few others here from September 20th to the 22nd in Sacramento. Went to many sessions and did some networking on topics like incentivizing retail, social media, housing, and homelessness. Don't have time to go into detail on everything, but I will point out the most enlightening piece that I came back with was a project in Santa Barbara County where Santa Barbara County, Santa Barbara City, and Goleta all collaborated on providing housing for the homeless. And the way that they were able to make interagency cooperation work. Got some great ideas from that and look forward to sharing those with Mayor Pro Tem Weintraub and our homelessness committee and see where we as a city might be able to collaborate with others.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Albert.
Thank you. That week, it was really an enjoyable experience, learning and rubbing elbows with a lot of people that had the same problems and same successes that we've had from cities throughout the state. I was a little shocked at one factor, and after taking this water trip, the city of Gold, I happened to sit next to that council person at our table for breakfast that morning, and they only have about 17,000 people in that city, and this is mid-state, and they had 3,700 homeless. So we had a lot to talk about to see what they're doing, and so it was a good chance to make comparisons and learning. And I took a lot of notes, and so glad I went. Task force wise, economic development is scheduled for the end of next week. Mayor Pro Tem and I are looking forward to that. Mayor Shapiro and I are about to schedule a sustainability. We've both been going for a while. I was on the water trip and then with Sacramento. And then just some news about the Clean Power Alliance. I was a little new to it when I started, but I remember when the city and the council voted to take it on in 2000, I think it was 2018, because they started in 2017. Now they've got 32 cities, 1 million customers, 3,000 residents, and 63% of the power is supplied by solar and 37% by wind. And one of the coolest factors is it avoided almost 7.1 billion pounds of greenhouse emissions. It's an amazing number, and they're growing. And I just got I'm not going to go through it tonight, but I got a news alert that their credit rating today went up, was established by Best and at A-, which is really cool. And we're involved with that with the city. So we're in good hands, and it's growing even better and stronger. That's my report.
Thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem Weintraub.
Not necessarily a task force report, but I'll go with it. A lot of residents have been experiencing concerns regarding traffic in the morning, and it's really, really helpful if you send an email explaining the situation, because, for example, 2 residents reached out this morning regarding 2 specific situations, and staff was able to address them. One happened to have been from the water district. It was a work that was done overnight and just extended into the 7 o'clock hour, but we were able to go out right away and make sure it would not impact the school time. And the other situation was a resident noticing private construction, but blocking the street. So staff was able to talk with the construction supervisor to make sure that that work is not taking place. So I know people get upset about the situation, but if they can just reach out to us, our staff is really, really trying to address these areas of concerns, and having the time and location is really helpful in order for us to acknowledge where the gridlock is happening and the time of day. So I'll let David. I'll share. David and I, as part of our public safety task force, met with colleagues from Malibu and fire and the host team to talk about public safety issues. And it's going to be quarterly, did we say? May? It's really needed just to get everyone in the room. And we were able to provide Michael McConville with some of the individuals that we met, because they want to make sure that they are very accessible to the city. So it was a good meeting.
And on following up, the number one thing, in addition to working together, was communication for our entire region for any emergency or any need. And that was, hopefully it'll be very successful. I had a number of meetings. I won't go in, it's very late for many. I presented to COG this last week or 2 weeks, and then had multiple SCAG meetings, including legislative and communication. There's a lot of legislation coming down that I know League of Cities works with as well. We'll be talking about it. The Mayor's Youth Council had a great event. Mayor Pro Tem and I met with the Mayor's Youth Council, and our Assembly member, Jackie Irwin, met one-on-one with our very own Mayor's Youth Council and spent a good half hour, 45 minutes having coffee and answering their questions. And they were tremendous. Thank you to Mari Hernandez for your great work. And then I had the pleasure to do a meet and greet with Assembly member Irwin also at the Commons. A lot of people came from the city and asked questions, hopefully mostly of her, which was good. And she was very accessible and appreciative. And then the Mayor's Youth Council that same day did a voter registration date and got a number of individuals registered, and it was a great turnout. And that's it for me. Does the city manager have anything to report?
I didn't get my turn, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
I don't have a long one.
Councilmember Bazad.
Quickly, I also wanted to state that I did attend the League of California Cities Convention, and as a new board member, I'll be attending their actual board meetings that are quarterly around the state.
Thank you very much. Now, does the city manager have anything to report?
Yes, Mayor, just a couple items. While in Sacramento with the council members that attended the Cal Cities conference, I was able to meet with the team that is reviewing or working on our energy retrofits and solar project. We have a scheduled meeting at the end of this week or early next week with our staff to review the entire project proposal. And then we'll be coming back probably to the committee, first one of our committees to vet that a little bit more and then bring that to council. So we're excited to see that move forward. In regards to sustainability, Councilman Albrecht, Mayor, you mentioned having a meeting. I am pleased to report that we did have interviews this week for the environmental manager position that has been vacant for some time. And we're hoping to extend an offer on that soon. We had some wonderful candidates on that, and that will help us both with our environmental commission and our committee, our council committee on sustainability, to move some of these issues forward. So we're excited about that. Mayor Pro Tem, you mentioned some of the traffic issues. I do want to remind our residents that we have a wonderful shuttle system that does include stops at the schools. It's underutilized in the sense that there are spaces on those buses, and we would love to see people use those. Each person on a bus reduces vehicle travel to the schools, and so that would free up a lot of our traffic. And then finally, Mayor, if I could just provide something looking forward, and this is more in regards to the future agenda items. I've had a couple of the council members, actually, many of you have asked about items on the future agenda list. And as to when those items will be coming back. What I'd like to propose, if we could, is schedule some time at one of the meetings in October to actually get a priority direction from the council on these, so we could, as staff, could move forward. And what we would do is either on October 11th or the 25th, just review that list of over 25 now that are on there. Help us understand what is the most important to the majority of the council, and we'll start tackling those. I'd also like to see, as we look into some of these items, several probably could be assigned to commissions, or I'm sorry, council committees, or maybe even a commission. And so I'd like some direction on that as well, because I think working with the council committees accelerates this process quite a bit and moves these future agenda items quickly. So I'd like to propose that at a future meeting.
Okay. I guess it's a recommendation. We're coming up to requests for future agenda items. That sounds like a request, and I'm fine with that as well. I'll turn to my colleagues. Any future agenda requests?
Well, I actually was going to say something a little bit similar to that, but with a little bit of difference. Some of these items are so old that I think it's a little unfair to come back to us after they've been requested numerous times and say, okay, now it's subject to another vote. Some of these are over a year old. Some of these have no information as to who requested it and they have no date. Some of it are nondescript. Some of it have a council member's name on it who no longer on the council. That's how old they are. So I think, some of these items seem to be fast tracked, like the cannabis discussion, and some of them are a year and a half old and there's no discussion. So before we get to the later items, I would expect the earlier items to be discussed. And some of them, like I mentioned, the airplane noise thing has been asked for 4 times, and I don't think it should be subject to another vote.
I'm willing to follow the direction of the council on that once we bring that back. So,
okay. And any requests for future agenda items?
I'm going to mention the airplane noise thing again, because according to the city attorney's rule, at one meeting, there were 3 people who asked for it, and then it got buried, which is not the rule that was articulated several years ago by your firm. So I want to know what the rule is, and I want to know when this is going to be heard.
So the rule, in short, as set by the council by majority, which can be changed by the council by majority at will at any time, is that any 2 members of the council may put an item on the agenda, subject to discretion of the mayor as to when. Any 3 members of council may put an item on the agenda and dictate the time for that item. We did not have prior direction to dictate the time for the agenda item on the airplane noise. We await majority direction if that's to return.
That is actually not what our previous city attorney, which is from your firm, told us. There was never any requirement that a date be given. His words were on the next available agenda. And he did not, and there is no rule in any protocol that says 3 council members, it takes 3 council members. That was your firm's rule that you interpreted.
It has also been the rule the city has used for the past 4 years. Again, we await majority direction. The council can change it at will by majority direction.
We don't
look for majority direction.
But we never implemented it by majority direction. That was a rule that you articulated, your firm. You were not the city attorney person at the time. And I expect that if there's going to be a change behind the scenes as to what the rule is, that it be mentioned rather than just being brought up only when I bring up something that I want on the agenda. So David, there was a meeting where you and I both said we wanted to hear the airplane noise, and somebody else said they did too. That's 3 people. So according to Scott Howard's quote, the next available agenda, we waited 5 months, 6 months, and it's still not here.
Again, we wait majority direction.
Well, you have your majority.
No, you have asked it to come. What agenda item do you want it on? Give us a date and we'll do that.
I would like it on, well, the next agenda is busy with the protocols, the second meeting in October.
Is there 3 to do that?
I'll be fine with that. Just so I'm clear what we're asking for, because I know we filed objections or letters with the FDA previously. FAA. I'm a little tired, as you might tell. FAA previously, so I want to make sure what we're requesting.
Legislation that we all approved of, that was a proposed bill that we sent a letter, and we went to meetings that got shelved in the old Congress. So what we need to do now is to rediscuss what our strategy in the new Congress, especially because we have a new member of Congress. This will give the public an opportunity to tell us what's been happening, because I keep getting complaints.
So do we all.
The second meeting in October is fine. I think that's a reasonable request. This was made in January, and now that I guess there's a brand new rule that it takes 3 council members to say what day we want, which was never the rule, Matt. I will bring in Scott Howard if need be, and we can have him give his quote.
Okay.
But I don't want to do that. All I want to do is just hear the item, really.
And that's what we're waiting for majority direction. So two.
I'm fine with having it come the second meeting in October to discuss. And
I'm fine. I asked for it before. We still get a lot of concerns. I just want to make sure when the item comes back, it's discussing the current flight plan. So we know what's changed in the neighborhoods and everything. So,
and what legislation was introduced in this Congress.
Yeah, we'll include a complete update on the item, and complete update on the item to include sort of where we are today, as forward, mindful that we have limited control over the feds, but still what options we have. We'll bring that forward.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other future agenda item requests? No. And Kendon, why don't we, since we're doing that, why don't we put this on the 25th to go over the other items, if that's agreeable to council? I guess I'm making that request or seconding it. I can't second yours, but
one of our protocols, you have
the mayor does have control. So
right.
Requested. So as mayor, you can control it.
It's yes.
I
won't say anything more than that.
We'll do that October 25th?
25th is fine. Okay. All right. Nothing else at 10:18, I believe the city council will adjourn to the next regularly scheduled meeting of Wednesday, October 11, 2023 at 7 p.m. Thanks very much.